unveiling the secret of the Stoics to build a growth mindset. This will change your life. There comes a moment in life when you feel stuck without understanding why. You work hard, you push forward, you stay busy, yet some invisible force keeps pulling you back to the same patterns, the same doubts, the same version of yourself you're trying so desperately to outgrow. And if you look closely, you will notice something profound. The obstacle is rarely the world around you. The true barrier is the story your mind keeps telling you about who you are. Have you ever felt trapped by thoughts you didn't choose? Thoughts that appear the moment you try to change. Thoughts that whisper, "You are not ready, not capable, not enough." These thoughts don't come from failure itself. They come from a fragile identity built on fear, comparison, and uncertainty. Long before modern psychology gave these patterns a name, the Stoics understood that your greatest battles happen within your own perception. They knew that the mind, when left untrained, becomes a cage. But when guided with discipline and awareness, it becomes a source of strength, clarity, and inner freedom. Every Stoic, from Epictetus to Marcus Aurelius, faced chaos, pressure, and uncertainty just as we do. Yet they learned to master something most people never learn: the ability to pause between stimulus and response. That pause is where your power lives. That pause is where growth begins. That pause is the doorway out of emotional reactivity and into conscious self-direction. Modern neuroscience confirms this truth. Your brain rewires through the thoughts you observe, the emotions you regulate, and the actions you repeat with intention. But here is the hidden enemy. The mind resists growth because it prefers familiarity over possibility. It clings to the known even when the known is painful. It fears change, not because change is dangerous, but because change requires awareness, responsibility, and courage. Your mind would rather repeat a limiting story than risk stepping into a new identity. This is why you can crave transformation, yet sabotage your own progress without noticing. Calm begins the moment you accept what's beyond your control. Strength begins the moment you take responsibility for what is within your control. Growth begins the moment you decide to change your inner narrative instead of trying to change reality itself. The Stoics teach that external events are not the problem. It is our interpretation of them that either traps us or sets us free. Your mindset is not a personality trait. It is a trained response. It is the result of how you meet your thoughts, how you interpret your challenges, and how you choose to show up in moments of discomfort. What if the life you want is not blocked by external limitations, but by the mental habits you have not yet questioned? What if the person you are becoming depends less on what happens to you and more on how you choose to think about what happens? What if you could train your mind to face adversity with clarity instead of fear, to meet failure with patience instead of shame, and to rise stronger instead of shrinking back? This video is not about motivation. It is about transformation. It is about shifting the inner dialogue that shapes your identity. It is about breaking the patterns that keep you small. It is about discovering the Stoic secret that turns ordinary people into resilient, disciplined, and mentally unshakable human beings. And as you listen, something in you will begin to awaken. A calmer voice, a clearer mind, a stronger sense of direction. Because the moment you understand how your mind works, you stop being controlled by it. You begin to lead it. And when you lead your mind, you change your life. The Stoic shift: changing your inner narrative before your outer life. There is a turning point in every person's life where growth becomes impossible until the inner narrative changes. You can adjust your habits, your routines, your goals, and even your environment. But if the story you tell yourself remains the same, nothing truly transforms. The Stoics understood this with extraordinary clarity. They believed that before you can master your actions, you must first master the interpretations behind those actions. Because every emotion, every reaction, every decision begins as a thought, and every thought is shaped by the narrative running quietly beneath your awareness. Have you ever noticed how two people can face the same situation and respond in completely different ways? One collapses, the other grows. One sees a threat, the other sees an opportunity. The difference is not in the event. The difference is in the interpretation. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the quality of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. Epictetus went further, saying that you are disturbed not by events themselves, but by the opinions you hold about them. Modern psychology agrees. Cognitive science confirms that your brain builds reality through the meaning you assign to what happens. But here is the problem. Most people never question their interpretations because they feel automatic. You think the thought is the truth when in reality it is only a habit. Perhaps you grew up believing you were not enough. Perhaps your past failures convinced you that you were incapable. Perhaps comparison shaped your identity more than your own experience did. These internal narratives follow you into adulthood, into relationships, into work, into your dreams. They become the filter through which you see possibility or impossibility. They become the silent author of your self-image. Have you ever asked yourself why the same thought appears every time you attempt something new? Why your mind returns to the same doubts when you stand at the edge of a challenge? Why your inner critic is louder than your inner coach? It is because your narrative never changed. Your actions try to move forward, but your identity is still anchored in the past. Growth cannot happen until your story evolves. This is the Stoic shift. It is the moment you stop believing every thought your mind presents. It is the moment you begin observing rather than identifying. It is the moment you realize that thoughts are not commands. They are interpretations. And interpretations can be rewritten. The Stoics trained themselves to interrupt automatic thinking and replace it with deliberate reasoning. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they asked, "What does this mean? And is that meaning true?" Instead of assuming the worst, they examined their fears. Instead of accepting emotional reactions, they analyzed them. This mental shift activates neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. Every time you pause a negative thought, every time you reinterpret a challenge, every time you choose a more constructive inner dialogue, you strengthen new mental pathways. You are not just thinking differently, you are becoming different. Ask yourself right now, what is the story you have been telling yourself without realizing it? Is it a story shaped by past wounds? A story built from comparison? A story inherited from others who never learned how to grow themselves? Or is it a story shaped by awareness, resilience, and reason? The Stoic secret is this: you cannot control the world, but you can control the meaning you give to the world. And when the meaning changes, your experience changes. When the inner narrative shifts, your outer life follows. Imagine approaching setbacks not with panic but with clarity. Imagine facing criticism not with insecurity but with confidence. Imagine waking each day with a mind trained to interpret challenges as growth rather than threat. This is not unrealistic optimism. This is mental discipline. This is philosophical strength. This is psychological regulation. This is the alignment of mind and action. If you learn to master the story you tell yourself, you will no longer be shaped by circumstances. You will become the one shaping them. That is the Stoic shift. That is the foundation of growth. And once you take this step, every other step becomes easier. The discipline of perception, training the mind to see clearly. There is a quiet truth the Stoics understood better than most people ever will. Your suffering does not come from what happens to you. It comes from how you see what happens to you. Perception is the lens through which your mind filters every experience, and most people never realize how clouded that lens has become. They look at life through fear, through past wounds, through insecurity, through assumptions, through the projections of others, and they wonder why everything feels heavier than it should. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by a situation that, in hindsight, wasn't as catastrophic as your mind made it? Have you reacted with anxiety or anger only to later question why it felt so intense? This happens because perception, when left untrained, magnifies problems and minimizes possibilities. The Stoics believe that if you can discipline the way you interpret reality, you can discipline the way you experience life itself. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. Every morning he reminded himself that challenges were not interruptions, but opportunities to demonstrate virtue. Every evening he examined the assumptions he carried through the day. He did not trust his first reaction. He questioned it. He refined it. He trained it. Modern psychology calls this cognitive reframing. Neuroscience calls it attentional control. The Stoics simply called it wisdom. Your perception is not passive, it is active. It selects what to focus on, what to ignore, and what meaning to attach to each moment. When your perception is governed by fear, your mind becomes a battlefield. When it is governed by clarity, your mind becomes a sanctuary. The discipline of perception is the ability to pause long enough to examine what your mind is presenting before accepting it as truth. Ask yourself honestly, when something goes wrong, what is your first instinct? Do you imagine the worst outcome? Do you believe the discomfort will last forever? Do you blame yourself or assume others are against you? These automatic interpretations are not facts, they are habits. And like any habit, they can be retrained. The Stoics developed exercises to reshape perception. One of them was zooming out. When a problem felt overwhelming, they imagined how small it would look from a wider perspective. Another was focusing only on what they could control and releasing the rest. Another was identifying the emotional exaggeration in their reaction and replacing it with rational clarity. Each technique was a way of dismantling distorted perception and replacing it with awareness. Modern research supports this. When you consciously shift how you interpret an event, you change the neural pathways that determine emotional response. You weaken the circuits of fear and strengthen the circuits of resilience. You are not suppressing emotion. You are strengthening perception. Have you ever asked yourself why some people remain calm during chaos while others fall apart under mild pressure? It is not luck. It is training. Calm minds are not accidental. They are cultivated. They are shaped through repeated practice in seeing clearly rather than emotionally. They are built through questioning assumptions, pausing before reacting, and choosing perspective over panic. Perception is not about pretending everything is positive. It is about seeing reality without distortion. It is about recognizing that events are neutral until your mind assigns a meaning. It is about stepping away from the noise of your first reaction and seeing the situation through reason, awareness, and grounded understanding. Imagine the freedom of facing challenges without feeling crushed. Imagine solving problems without emotional fog. Imagine navigating conflict without taking everything personally. This is what perception training creates. It gives you authority over your reactions. It gives you clarity in confusion. It gives you a mind that responds instead of a mind that panics. The discipline of perception is the foundation of a growth mindset, because growth requires clarity. You cannot grow when you misinterpret every challenge as a threat. You grow when you see the truth of the moment and act from awareness instead of impulse. Train your perception, and you change your experience. Change your experience, and you change your life. Emotional alchemy, turning fear and frustration into focus. There is a moment in every challenge where the emotion rises before the clarity does. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts speed up. Your breathing shortens. Fear arrives first. Frustration arrives second. And your mind begins to react faster than your awareness can intervene. Most people assume this reaction is involuntary, but the Stoics discovered something profound. Emotion is not the enemy. Emotion is raw energy. And when skillfully directed, that energy becomes fuel for focus rather than chaos. Have you ever wondered why fear sometimes sharpens you and other times destroys your confidence? Why frustration can either motivate you to act or shut you down completely? The difference is not the emotion itself. The difference is the way you meet the emotion. The Stoics believed that you cannot control the initial wave of feeling, but you can control what you transform that feeling into. Modern neuroscience confirms this. The amygdala fires first, creating emotion, but the prefrontal cortex can reshape that emotional charge into intention, attention, and deliberate action. This is emotional alchemy. It is the art of converting impulsive emotion into conscious strength. Instead of drowning in fear, you channel its energy into preparation. Instead of collapsing under frustration, you use it to clarify what needs to change. Instead of resisting discomfort, you turn it into the catalyst for a new level of discipline. Emotion becomes growth the moment you take responsibility for its direction. Ask yourself, what do you usually do when fear rises? Do you run? Do you freeze? Do you avoid? Do you attack? Fear becomes destructive only when you fight it or flee from it. But when you observe it without judgment, something shifts. You create space between feeling and reaction. In that space, fear loses its power to control you. It becomes information rather than identity. It becomes a signal pointing to where growth is needed. Frustration works the same way. It appears when your expectations clash with reality. Most people interpret frustration as failure. The Stoics interpreted it as feedback, a sign that the mind is trying to force what cannot be controlled or resist what must be accepted. When frustration is met with awareness, it transforms into clarity. It shows you what to release, what to adjust, what to commit to with more discipline. Emotional alchemy requires presence. You must notice the emotion before it becomes reaction. Seneca wrote that anger is like falling into a trap the moment you stop paying attention. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to expect irritation, fear, and difficulty, not to avoid them but to greet them with a prepared mind. Modern psychological tools echo this ancient wisdom. Mindful awareness, name the emotion techniques, breath regulation, and cognitive reframing all strengthen the brain's ability to transform emotional impulses into conscious response. Imagine the difference between someone who reacts to fear and someone who redirects it. The first person panics, hesitates, or abandons their goals. The second person uses fear as a map, revealing where courage must be practiced. Imagine the difference between someone who collapses under frustration and someone who channels it into refinement. The first feels stuck. The second evolves. Your emotional life is not a battlefield you need to win. It is a source of energy you need to learn to guide. When emotion rises, instead of asking, "Why am I feeling this?" ask, "What can this feeling help me understand or do?" Instead of resisting the discomfort, ask, "How can this discomfort focus me?" You will notice that emotion begins to lose its chaos and gain direction. This is the Stoic secret. Emotion becomes a tool when reason becomes the guide. Growth begins the moment you stop believing you must eliminate fear and start learning how to redirect it. Focus is not the absence of emotion. It is the mastery of emotion. It is your ability to stay centered while your mind moves through intense feeling. If you learn emotional alchemy, fear becomes awareness. Frustration becomes precision. Discomfort becomes power. And your mind becomes a place where growth is not a struggle but a natural response to every challenge. The power of voluntary discomfort, building mental flexibility. There is a truth about human nature that the Stoics understood long before modern science explained it. The mind grows weaker when life becomes too comfortable. Comfort creates stagnation. Comfort creates fear of the unfamiliar. Comfort creates a fragile identity that collapses under pressure. Yet discomfort, when chosen consciously and practiced intentionally, becomes one of the greatest tools for growth. It builds resilience, clarity, adaptability, and inner strength. This is why the Stoics embraced voluntary discomfort, not as punishment, but as training. Have you ever noticed how small challenges feel enormous when you haven't faced difficulty in a while? How simple problems suddenly overwhelm you? How unexpected stress can throw your entire day off balance? This happens because the mind, like a muscle, loses flexibility when it is not challenged. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself not to indulge in luxury too often, not because he rejected comfort, but because he knew comfort weakens the inner architecture of the mind. Epictetus advised practicing with small hardships so that larger ones would not break you. Modern psychology echoes this through stress inoculation theory, showing that controlled exposure to discomfort strengthens the brain's ability to handle adversity. Voluntary discomfort is not about suffering. It is about expanding your capacity. It is about choosing challenges before challenges choose you. It is about meeting controlled stress on your terms so that chaos does not control you later. When you step into discomfort intentionally, your nervous system learns to regulate itself under pressure. Your mind learns that difficulty is survivable. Your identity learns that resilience is part of who you are. Ask yourself, when was the last time you did something uncomfortable on purpose? Not out of necessity, but out of growth. Something as simple as holding silence, waking earlier, delaying gratification, or doing a task you've been avoiding. These small acts of discomfort sharpen the mind. They remind you that discipline grows through repetition, not inspiration. They rewire your brain to approach challenge instead of avoiding it. The Stoics practiced cold exposure, fasting, simplicity, and physical discipline not to prove their strength but to train their perception. They wanted to experience difficulty while the stakes were low, so that when real adversity arrived, they met it with calm rather than panic. This is psychological resilience. This is behavioral conditioning. This is neuroscience and philosophy working together. When you choose discomfort, you teach your mind that fear is not a command. You teach your body that tension is temporary. You teach your habits that discipline is stronger than emotion. You step outside the shrinking circle of your comfort zone and widen your capacity to meet life with stability. Voluntary discomfort increases your tolerance for stress, but it also strengthens your clarity. When you intentionally step into something challenging, you learn to separate real danger from imagined danger. You learn to identify which fears need attention and which fears are just echoes of past experiences. You learn that most limitations are mental, not physical. Imagine how your resilience would change if you practiced small discomforts daily. Imagine how much calmer you would become when challenges appear. Imagine how much more confident you would feel stepping into unfamiliar situations. You would no longer view adversity as a threat. You would view it as training, because that is exactly what it becomes. The growth mindset is built on the belief that you can expand your abilities through effort and practice. Voluntary discomfort is the practical foundation of this belief. It proves to you through experience that you can do hard things. It proves that your mind is adaptable. It proves that your identity is not fixed. Each time you choose discomfort, you strengthen the part of you that believes in your own capacity to change. The Stoics were not trying to avoid pain. They were trying to avoid fragility. They understood that a life spent chasing comfort leads to a mind unprepared for reality. But a life that embraces controlled discomfort builds a mind capable of meeting anything with stability. When you learn to choose discomfort intentionally, you no longer fear it. You begin to see it as a path, a teacher, a sharpening stone. You grow not by avoiding what is hard, but by stepping into it with awareness, discipline, and steady breath. Self-compassion as strength, what ancient Stoics intuitively understood. There is a misconception people often carry about Stoicism. They imagine it as emotional suppression, toughness at all costs, a cold detachment from feeling. But if you read Seneca, Epictetus, or Marcus Aurelius with a careful mind, you notice something deeper. They were not teaching people to harden themselves. They were teaching people to become whole. They understood that a mind constantly attacking itself cannot grow. A person who speaks to themselves with cruelty cannot become resilient. And a life driven by self-judgment cannot create clarity. What modern psychology calls self-compassion, the Stoics practiced as inner gentleness, a necessary ingredient for discipline, not a contradiction to it. Have you ever asked yourself why you forgive others faster than you forgive yourself? Why you can show patience toward a friend who struggles, yet react with harshness when you make the same mistake? This imbalance destroys growth. It creates a fixed mindset where failure equals identity and mistakes become evidence of inadequacy. The Stoics warned against this mental trap. They believed that you should correct yourself, never condemn yourself. You should evaluate your behavior, never attack your worth. Self-compassion, in their eyes, was not weakness. It was maintenance of the soul. Modern psychology confirms that people grow faster when they treat themselves with kindness. Self-compassion reduces fear of failure because you no longer believe that mistakes make you unworthy. It increases resilience because your sense of self is not shattered each time you fall. And it strengthens motivation because you feel safe enough to take risks. The brain cannot learn in a state of fear. It learns in a state of openness. This is why self-compassion is a neurological tool, not just an emotional one. Ask yourself honestly, when you fail, what tone does your inner voice take? Does it criticize, shame, or belittle you? Or does it acknowledge the mistake and guide you toward improvement? Your inner voice is your most constant companion. If it becomes an enemy, growth becomes impossible. But when it becomes a mentor, firm, fair, and compassionate, you create mental conditions where transformation can happen. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself with patience. His private journals reveal a man who corrected his thoughts but never insulted himself. He guided his mind like a teacher guiding a student, firm but gentle. Epictetus warned against calling yourself names or degrading your spirit. Seneca encouraged understanding your emotional responses, not punishing them. These were not men avoiding responsibility. They were men embracing humanity. Self-compassion does not mean excusing everything you do. It means acknowledging your imperfections without letting them define you. It means recognizing that failure is part of the process, not a verdict on your worth. It means speaking to yourself with the same respect you offer to those you love. A calm inner voice does not make you soft. It makes you stable. Growth requires psychological safety. If your mind becomes a battlefield, you will avoid anything that risks discomfort. If your inner voice attacks you, you will shrink at the thought of failure. But when you cultivate self-compassion, you free yourself from the fear of imperfection. You create a mental environment where it becomes safe to try, safe to learn, safe to change. Imagine approaching your goals without the constant fear of disappointing yourself. Imagine facing setbacks without spiraling into self-blame. Imagine looking at your imperfections not as evidence of inadequacy, but as invitations to grow. This is what self-compassion makes possible. It turns discipline into something sustainable instead of punishing. It turns effort into something meaningful instead of fear-driven. It turns growth into a path where you walk with yourself instead of against yourself. The Stoics knew you cannot build strength on the foundation of self-hate. They insisted that virtue requires a balanced soul, not a tortured one. You cannot control the world. You cannot control every emotion. But you can control the way you treat yourself in the face of both. And that choice, treating yourself with patient clarity instead of harsh judgment, shapes your resilience more than any external challenge ever could. When you learn to speak to yourself with compassion, you do not become weaker, you become unbreakable. Because a mind that supports itself instead of attacking itself is a mind that can rise from anything. The fixed mindset trap, Stoicism's warning against identity-based living. There is a subtle prison the human mind builds without noticing. Not a prison of walls, but a prison of labels. I'm this kind of person. I'm not good at that. I've always been this way. These phrases sound harmless, yet they anchor you to a limited version of yourself. The Stoics warned against this long before modern psychology named it the fixed mindset. Epictetus insisted that you are not your job, not your past, not your status, not your emotions, not even your thoughts. You are the one who chooses how to respond to them. The moment you confuse identity with habit or personality with limitation, you stop growing. Have you ever caught yourself repeating a story about who you are, even when that story no longer fits the person you are becoming? Maybe you tell yourself that you're not disciplined, because in the past you struggled to stay consistent. Maybe you believe you're not confident, because years ago someone convinced you that you shouldn't trust your own voice. Maybe you assume you're not capable of change because you've failed more times than you've succeeded. These beliefs feel like facts, but they are interpretations shaped by memory, emotion, and repetition. The Stoics understood that identity is fluid. Your character is built by your present choices, not frozen by your past behavior. The fixed mindset traps you in old patterns by convincing you that your traits are predetermined. The Stoic mindset frees you by reminding you that the mind is always in motion. Modern neuroscience supports this. The brain is plastic. It adapts. It rewires. It strengthens the pathways you practice and weakens the ones you neglect. Identity is a process, not a prison. Ask yourself, who told you the story you believe about yourself? Was it your younger self, speaking from fear? Was it someone who underestimated you? Was it a moment of failure that you turned into a lifelong definition? The Stoics believe that most suffering comes from misidentifying what is truly ours. Your mistakes are not yours. They are events. Your emotions are not yours. They are experiences. Your thoughts are not yours. They are impulses. What is yours is the ability to choose how you interpret, use, and grow from them. A fixed mindset attaches identity to struggle. A growth mindset sees struggle as training. A fixed mindset says, I can't. A growth mindset says, I haven't learned it yet. A fixed mindset fears being seen as imperfect. A growth mindset knows imperfection is the starting point of mastery. The Stoics lived in a world of constant hardship, yet they refused to let circumstances define who they were. They practiced separating their essence from external roles so they could adapt without losing themselves. Epictetus was born into slavery, yet he never described himself as a slave in spirit. Marcus Aurelius was emperor, yet he reminded himself he was not the throne he sat on. Seneca was one of Rome's greatest minds, yet he saw himself as a student of life until his final breath. Each of them resisted identity-based living because they understood that labels restrict possibility. The moment you say, "This is just who I am," you close the door to who you could become. Modern psychology shows that identity-based thoughts trigger emotional rigidity. You become defensive when challenged. You avoid effort because effort risks exposing limitation. You internalize criticism because it feels like a judgment on your essence, not on your behavior. A fixed identity creates fragile confidence. A flexible identity creates grounded resilience. Imagine the freedom of seeing yourself as a process instead of a finished product. Imagine releasing the pressure to always be consistent with your past. Imagine meeting yourself each day with curiosity rather than self-judgment. This shift opens mental space for experimentation, learning, and transformation. The Stoics encourage this by practicing daily reflection, not to criticize themselves, but to examine their choices and adjust their path. They believed virtue grows through iteration, not perfection. If you stop tying your worth to outcomes, you can begin investing your energy into growth. If you stop defining yourself by past patterns, you can begin shaping a new narrative. If you stop clinging to identity, you can begin embracing possibility. The fixed mindset traps you in who you were. The Stoic mindset invites you into who you can become. Your identity is not carved in stone. It is shaped in every decision, every habit, every thought you choose to nurture. When you release identity-based living, you step out of the prison of limitation and into the open space of transformation. The three controllables, a mental blueprint for freedom. There is a moment in your life when the weight you carry becomes unbearable, not because it is heavy, but because so much of it is not yours to carry. The Stoics discovered a truth that most people spend their entire life resisting. You suffer most when you try to control what is beyond your reach, and you grow most when you learn to master what is within your reach. This is the essence of the Stoic blueprint for freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom from internal chaos. Have you ever noticed how much mental energy is spent worrying about outcomes you cannot dictate, people you cannot change, and circumstances you cannot predict? How much anxiety comes from anticipating what might go wrong, rather than focusing on what you can actually influence? Modern psychology calls this cognitive overload. The Stoics called it misdirected effort. Both point to the same truth. When your attention is scattered across things you cannot control, your mind becomes fragmented. Epictetus taught that human beings only truly control three things: their thoughts, their effort, and their attitude. These three controllables become the anchor in every storm, the compass in every confusion, the structure that turns chaos into clarity. Everything else, opinions, events, the past, other people's reactions, luck, timing, outcomes, belongs to the external world. The moment you release what is not yours, your mind becomes lighter. The moment you commit to mastering what is yours, your mind becomes stronger. Ask yourself, how much of your daily frustration comes from trying to control how others see you? How much disappointment comes from expecting life to unfold exactly as you planned? How much stress comes from resisting uncertainty? These battles drain your strength because they force you into a position where victory is impossible. You cannot control the world, but you can control the way you respond to it. You cannot control outcomes, but you can control the effort you contribute toward them. You cannot control emotion, but you can control whether emotion becomes action. Thoughts are the first controllable. They shape the lens through which you see the world. They influence your expectations, your interpretations, and your emotional state. A mind left unexamined becomes reactive and chaotic. A mind guided by awareness becomes stable and resilient. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to purify his thoughts so that his actions would follow with clarity. Effort is the second controllable. It is what connects your intention to your reality. You may not control the results of your work, but you control the quality and consistency of the work you offer. Seneca believed that effort reveals character, not talent, not status, not success. When you give your best effort, you stand in integrity regardless of the outcome. Attitude is the third controllable. It is the emotional position you choose to take toward reality. You may not control external events, but you control whether you meet them with resistance or acceptance, panic or presence, despair or courage. Attitude is the inner posture that allows you to stay grounded even when life becomes unpredictable. Modern neuroscience confirms that attitude shapes emotional resilience by influencing neural responses to stress. Imagine how different your days would feel if your attention were anchored only in what you can truly influence. Imagine no longer being pulled by the emotional turbulence of circumstances. Imagine navigating uncertainty with steady breath instead of panic. When you focus on the three controllables, you cut away the mental noise that drains your clarity. You build an identity rooted in reason, discipline, and stability. The growth mindset requires this blueprint because growth becomes impossible when your energy is scattered across things you cannot change. Mastery begins when you redirect that energy inward, toward your thoughts, your effort, and your attitude. These controllables form the architecture of mental freedom. They transform you from someone carried by life into someone guiding their inner world with intention. The Stoics were not teaching passivity. They were teaching strategic focus. They were teaching the art of investing your energy where it creates change and releasing what only creates suffering. When you commit to these three controllables, you cultivate calm without becoming indifferent, strength without becoming rigid, discipline without becoming harsh. Real freedom is not the absence of obstacles. It is the ability to meet any obstacle with a mind that is steady, aware, and aligned with what it can control. When you master the controllables, you no longer fear uncertainty. You face life with clarity. The inner coach versus inner critic. Rewriting the dialogue that shapes your destiny. There is a voice inside you that speaks long before you take action. A voice that comments on your every attempt, your every failure, your every dream. Sometimes this voice pushes you forward with clarity and strength. Other times it pulls you backward with doubt and judgment. The Stoics understood that this inner dialogue, more than talent, environment, or luck, determines the direction of your life. Modern psychology agrees. Your inner voice shapes your identity, your motivation, and your capacity to grow. The question is, which voice is leading your life right now? Your inner coach or your inner critic? Have you ever noticed how harshly you speak to yourself compared to how you would speak to someone you care about? How quickly the mind says you always fail, or you're not capable, or you're behind everyone else. These statements do not reflect truth. They reflect habit. They reflect old wounds. They reflect stories you never questioned. Over time, these internal messages create a fixed mindset, one that fears effort, avoids discomfort, and interprets setbacks as personal flaws. The Stoics warned that an unmanaged inner voice becomes a tyrant. It distorts perception and paralyzes action. Your inner coach speaks differently. It doesn't flatter you or deny difficulty. It guides you. It grounds you. It reminds you of what's within your control. It speaks with clarity instead of panic, encouragement instead of shame, reason instead of fear. This voice is not fantasy. It is a mental skill that can be cultivated. Napoleon Hill called it autosuggestion. Cognitive behavioral therapy calls it reframing. The Stoics called it ruling your own mind. Ask yourself right now, when you face a challenge, what does your inner voice say first? Does it encourage you to take one step forward, or does it predict your failure before you begin? Your inner critic thrives on exaggeration. It takes temporary emotions and turns them into permanent conclusions. It takes a single mistake and turns it into a definition of your character. But your inner coach looks at the same moment, and sees information, not identity. It sees effort, not inadequacy. It sees possibility, not limitation. Marcus Aurelius wrote reminders to himself because he understood that without self-guidance, the mind drifts toward negativity. Epictetus advised his students to challenge their automatic thoughts and replace them with thoughts rooted in reason. Seneca encouraged speaking to yourself as a mentor, not an enemy. They were not avoiding reality. They were training the mind to interpret reality with wisdom rather than fear. Modern neuroscience shows that self-talk influences emotional regulation, motivation, and even physical performance. Negative self-talk activates threat responses in the brain, shrinking your capacity to think clearly. Supportive self-talk activates prefrontal regions associated with problem-solving and resilience. In other words, the voice you use inside your mind literally changes how your brain functions. Imagine the impact of shifting this inner dialogue. Imagine waking each day guided not by criticism, but by clarity. Imagine meeting setbacks with a voice that says, "Adjust and continue," rather than, "You failed again." Imagine stepping into challenges with the steady assurance that you are capable of learning, adapting, and growing. You would begin to act differently, not because life became easier, but because your mind became aligned with your potential instead of your fear. The Stoics believe that the quality of your life depends on the quality of your inner dialogue. A harsh inner critic creates emotional instability. A compassionate inner coach creates resilience. But this shift does not happen passively. It begins the moment you start exposing your inner critic's exaggerations. The moment you ask, "Is this thought true, or is it a habit?" The moment you choose words that guide you instead of words that wound you. You are not trying to silence your inner critic. You are learning to lead it, to teach it, to reshape it into a voice that supports growth rather than suppresses it. Every time you adjust your inner dialogue, you strengthen new neural pathways. You become more grounded, more focused, more capable. You begin to move through life not as someone dominated by fear, but as someone guided by clarity. When the inner coach leads, progress becomes consistent. Failure becomes information, effort becomes meaningful, and growth becomes natural. This is the Stoic and psychological secret. Your destiny is shaped not by the world, but by the voice you choose to listen to within yourself. Reflection. Without self-attack. The Stoic method for daily improvement. There is a powerful practice at the heart of Stoic philosophy that few people truly understand: daily reflection. Not reflection as rumination, not reflection as self-judgment, not reflection as dwelling on mistakes, but reflection as awareness, refinement, and quiet self-leadership. The Stoics believe that if you do not examine your days begin to control you. But if you learn to observe your actions with honesty and without cruelty, you unlock a form of growth that is steady, sustainable, and deeply transformative. Have you ever looked back on a day and felt overwhelmed by everything you did wrong? The things you avoided, the emotions you couldn't control, the moments when you said too much or not enough. The mind often treats reflection as an opportunity for punishment. It exaggerates faults and ignores progress. It repeats the same criticisms until they feel like truth. This kind of reflection does not lead to growth. It leads to shame, paralysis, and self-doubt. The Stoics practiced a different form of reflection, one that modern psychology now validates as one of the most effective tools for personal development. Seneca ended each day asking himself 3 questions. What did I do well? What could I improve? And what will I do differently tomorrow? Notice the tone. Not, what is wrong with me, but what can be adjusted? Not, I failed, but I learned. Not, I should be ashamed, but I can evolve. This is reflective awareness without self-attack. Ask yourself, when you reflect on your day, do you analyze your choices or condemn your character? Do you notice moments of strength or only moments of weakness? Do you allow yourself to acknowledge progress or do you dismiss it because it wasn't perfect? The mind often confuses criticism with responsibility, believing that harshness creates discipline. But neuroscience shows the opposite. Harsh self-judgment activates threat responses in the brain, reducing learning capacity. Compassionate reflection activates areas associated with problem-solving and adaptive change. Reflection is not a courtroom, it is a classroom. Its purpose is not to punish you. Its purpose is to guide you, to show you patterns you didn't notice, to help you understand your emotional triggers, to give you clarity about the choices you make on autopilot. When reflection becomes a tool rather than a weapon, you feel more grounded, not more ashamed. You feel more in control, not more defeated. Marcus Aurelius wrote pages of honest self-observation. He admitted his flaws, his frustrations, his moments of impatience and fear. But he never used these reflections to attack himself. He used them to redirect himself. Each entry was a recalibration, a way to return to his values, to anchor himself in reason, to adjust his attitude without damaging his spirit. Imagine ending each day not with guilt, but with understanding. Imagine being able to observe your mistakes without collapsing into self-blame. Imagine reviewing your behaviors with the same clarity and compassion you would offer someone you care about. This shift does not make you complacent. It makes you more disciplined, because discipline without self-hate becomes sustainable. When you know you can reflect honestly without being destroyed by your own judgment, you are more willing to look at yourself clearly. Reflection becomes a quiet ritual of self-alignment, a moment of returning to your intentions, a space where you review the thoughts that shaped your reactions, the emotions that guided your choices, and the patterns that deserve attention. You begin to see your life not as a series of random moments, but as a process you can influence with awareness. You become a student of your own mind. This is the Stoic method: gentle honesty, firm clarity, zero condemnation. You separate behavior from identity, pattern from essence, action from worth. You examine what you can adjust without dragging yourself through unnecessary suffering. You walk through your thoughts as if you were walking through a garden, removing what no longer serves you and nurturing what helps you grow. Reflection without self-attack builds the psychological space needed for a growth mindset. It teaches your mind that improvement is possible, that mistakes are teachers, and that you can evolve daily without fear. It turns your inner world into a place of guidance rather than punishment, a place where change feels attainable rather than dangerous. When you learn to reflect with compassion and clarity, every day becomes an opportunity, not to prove your worth, but to refine your path. This is how quiet, consistent transformation begins. The power of micro-actions. Stoic growth through small daily wins. There is a moment in every transformation where enthusiasm fades, motivation weakens, and the mind begins searching for excuses. People often believe they fail because they lack discipline or talent, but the truth is far simpler. They fail because they try to change their entire life at once. The Stoics understood a principle that modern neuroscience has now confirmed. Real growth is built through small, consistent actions, micro-actions that seem insignificant in the moment, but reshape identity over time. Have you ever set a larger-than-life goal and felt inspired for a day, perhaps even a week, only to lose momentum and fall back into old habits? This isn't a flaw in your character. It's the way the human brain works. The mind resists drastic change because drastic change threatens the familiar. But when change arrives in small, manageable steps, the brain adapts easily. This is neuroplasticity in action. It strengthens the pathways of new behaviors slowly, steadily, and sustainably. The Stoics practiced this long before the science existed. They believed that virtue was built moment by moment, choice by choice. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that greatness was not a single act, but a series of small decisions aligned with reason. Epictetus taught that improvement comes from doing what is necessary today, not fantasizing about what might happen tomorrow. Seneca wrote that life is made of small parts, and if you improve the parts, the whole transforms naturally. Ask yourself, what small action could you take today that your future self would thank you for? Not a dramatic overhaul, not a perfectionist leap. Something small enough to complete but meaningful enough to build momentum. 5 minutes of journaling, a quiet moment of breathwork, a single difficult task you've avoided. a micro step toward a bigger vision. The growth mindset thrives on these small wins because small wins create evidence. Evidence that you are capable. Evidence that you are consistent. Evidence that change is possible. This evidence rewires your identity. Each micro-action is a message to the brain. I follow through. Over time, this message becomes a belief, and that belief becomes a habit, and that habit becomes a personality trait. Imagine approaching change not with pressure, but with patience. Imagine seeing progress not as perfection but as steady movement. Imagine breaking your goals down until they become impossible to avoid. Micro-actions reduce resistance because they reduce fear. They bypass perfectionism. They silence procrastination. They keep you engaged without overwhelming your mind. Modern behavioral science supports this. When actions are small, dopamine is released more frequently, reinforcing behavior. When actions are manageable, the brain experiences a sense of success which fuels motivation. When actions are repeated, habit circuits in the basal ganglia strengthen. The result is behavioral momentum, the quiet force that keeps you going even when motivation disappears. The Stoics would say this creates inner alignment. When your actions reflect your values, no matter how small, your internal conflict decreases. You begin to feel integrity, your behavior and your identity moving in the same direction. This creates calm, focus, and self-trust. You no longer need to depend on emotional highs because discipline becomes your default. Micro-actions are powerful, not because they produce immediate results, but because they create sustainable identity change. They transform you from someone who tries into someone who becomes. A single step is not impressive in isolation, but 1,000 small steps in the same direction create mastery. You build resilience through repetition. You build wisdom through attention. You build strength through consistency. Ask yourself again, what is the smallest action you can take today that aligns with the person you want to become? Because transformation doesn't happen when you take one enormous step. Transformation happens when you take one small step 1,000 times. The Stoics understood this deeply. They built their character through practice, not performance. Through consistency, not intensity. When you embrace micro-actions, you stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop believing change must feel dramatic. You stop carrying the weight of unrealistic expectations. Instead, you begin living differently in subtle, consistent ways. And nothing changes a life faster than small things done daily. Radical acceptance. How to grow. When life doesn't go your way. There is a moment in every life when reality refuses to cooperate. Plans fall apart. People disappoint you. Opportunities slip through your fingers. Circumstances change faster than your ability to control them. In these moments, most people fight against what is happening. They resist, deny, complain, collapse, or try to force a different outcome. But the Stoics discovered something counterintuitive. The strongest path forward begins with acceptance. Not resignation, not passivity. Radical acceptance. The profound understanding that you cannot grow if you are at war with reality. Have you ever felt trapped in frustration because things didn't unfold the way you imagined? Have you replayed conversations you cannot change, wished for results that never came, or held onto expectations that only increased your suffering? This tension is not created by the situation itself. It is created by the gap between what you want and what exists. The Stoics believed that suffering comes from trying to control what is uncontrollable. When you release that resistance, your mind becomes free enough to see possibility again. Radical acceptance does not mean you approve of what happened. It means you acknowledge it without distortion. It means you stop arguing with reality long enough to understand it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that when events occur, the wise person asks not, "Why me?" but "How can this serve me?" Not in a naive sense, but in the recognition that growth requires presence, not protest. Seneca reminded us that storms are inevitable, and fighting the storm only exhausts you. You learn to adjust your sails instead. Modern psychology aligns with this truth. Acceptance reduces emotional suffering by removing the secondary layer of resistance. Pain becomes manageable when you stop adding mental judgment to it. Stress becomes navigable when you stop demanding the impossible. Neuroscience shows that when you accept what is happening, the brain shifts from threat mode to problem-solving mode. Acceptance creates clarity, and clarity creates direction. Ask yourself, what situation in your life right now do you keep resisting? What outcome do you keep trying to control? What expectation keeps you disappointed? This internal battle drains your energy because it requires constant mental effort. Acceptance is not about abandoning your goals. It is about grounding yourself in truth so you can pursue those goals with awareness instead of denial. Radical acceptance gives you back your power. When you stop fighting what is external, you can redirect your focus to what is internal. Your attitude, your decisions, your effort. You become responsive instead of reactive. You move with life instead of against it. The Stoics called this amor fati, the love of fate. Not because they celebrated hardship, but because they believed every event contains a potential for meaning. Acceptance opens the door to that meaning. Imagine standing in front of a challenge without collapsing into frustration. Imagine acknowledging disappointment without letting it define you. Imagine seeing unpredictability not as a threat, but as part of the landscape of growth. Acceptance does not erase difficulty. It removes the additional suffering created by insisting that life obey your plans. Radical acceptance also transforms failure. Instead of interpreting failure as a personal flaw, you see it as feedback. Instead of resisting what went wrong, you examine it with clarity. Instead of dwelling on how things should have been, you focus on what you can do next. Acceptance creates momentum because it shifts your attention from fantasy to reality, from resistance to action. This mindset builds resilience. It teaches you that you can face uncertainty without losing yourself. It teaches you that peace is found not when everything goes your way, but when you stop demanding that it must. You learn to embrace the present moment, not as a limitation, but as the only place where growth is possible. The Stoics believed that life becomes easier when you stop insisting that it be easy. Strength emerges when you stop expecting comfort and begin accepting complexity. Wisdom grows when you stop forcing outcomes and begin adapting to circumstances. Acceptance is not surrender. It is alignment. It places you in the only position where you can move forward with clarity and purpose. When life doesn't go your way, you have a choice. Resist what is and suffer, or accept what is and grow. Radical acceptance is the bridge between the world you wanted and the world you are capable of creating. Stoic visualization, rehearsing strength before reality requires it. There is a hidden dimension of Stoic practice that many overlook, a mental discipline so powerful that modern neuroscience now considers it one of the most effective tools for shaping behavior and building resilience. The Stoics understood that the mind does not simply react to reality, it prepares for it, it rehearses it, it anticipates it. And when used intentionally, this ability becomes a source of profound strength. Stoic visualization is not imagination for comfort. It is imagination for preparedness, clarity, and courage. Have you ever felt blindsided by a challenge you didn't expect? A conversation that turned tense, a plan that broke apart, a moment where your emotions surged faster than your ability to respond. The Stoics believed these moments overwhelm us not because they are inherently unbearable, but because the mind was unprepared for them. Visualization builds a mental buffer, allowing you to meet difficulty with steadiness instead of shock. Marcus Aurelius practiced what he called the premeditatio malorum, the rehearsal of potential difficulties, not to create anxiety, but to dissolve it. When you visualize challenges before they occur, you remove their power to intimidate you. You teach your mind that adversity is familiar, survivable, navigable. Modern sports psychology uses the same technique to improve performance. Neuroscience shows that the brain activates similar regions whether you perform an action or visualize it. You build neural strength through mental rehearsal the same way you build physical strength through repetition. Ask yourself, what do you fear most right now? Failure, rejection, uncertainty, difficult conversations, unexpected change. Now imagine rehearsing these moments with calm breath, grounded thoughts, and steady presence. Visualization allows you to step into the situation mentally before you face it physically. It transforms fear into familiarity, familiarity into confidence, confidence into action. But the Stoics also practiced positive visualization. They imagined themselves acting with virtue, responding with patience, speaking with wisdom, persevering through obstacles. They rehearsed the version of themselves they aspired to be. This is identity training. This is psychological priming. When you visualize a wise, calm, disciplined version of yourself, you begin strengthening the neural pathways that support those traits. Modern research calls this self-directed neuroplasticity. The brain becomes what you repeatedly imagine. If you visualize failure and embarrassment, your mind learns to anticipate those experiences. If you visualize courage and clarity, your mind learns to expect those outcomes. Visualization becomes a rehearsal of identity, shaping who you become long before real circumstances test you. Imagine starting your day by visualizing yourself navigating challenges with a stoic mind. Your thoughts steady, your emotions grounded, your actions aligned with your values. Imagine rehearsing difficult situations until they lose their emotional charge. Imagine preparing your mind so thoroughly that when adversity arrives, you meet it with calm recognition rather than fear. Visualization also redirects the mind away from catastrophizing. Instead of imagining the worst outcome in panic, you imagine the realistic outcome with awareness. Instead of reacting impulsively, you train yourself to pause. Instead of letting fear dominate your internal narrative, you teach your brain to process fear as information. Visualization becomes emotional conditioning. This practice also strengthens intentionality. You begin living with direction instead of drifting through the day. You make decisions with awareness rather than impulse. You enter conversations with clarity rather than insecurity. You face uncertainty with readiness rather than resistance. Stoic visualization creates a mental environment where challenges lose their power to destabilize you. Ask yourself again, what would change if you rehearsed your strength instead of your fear? What would happen if you prepared your mind to respond with virtue before life tested you? What if you treated every visualization session as a quiet meeting with your future self? A self who has already mastered what you are learning now. Visualization does not eliminate difficulty. It eliminates surprise. It builds a mind ready for reality instead of a mind shocked by it. It aligns your intentions with your behavior. It shapes your identity through repetition, and it prepares you to act with wisdom when the moment arrives. This is the Stoic secret. Strength is not built in battle. It is built in rehearsal. And when you train your mind before life demands it, you discover a resilience that feels unshakable. Detachment from outcomes, the Stoic secret to unshakable focus. There is a moment in every pursuit, every goal, every dream, every challenge, where your effort collides with uncertainty. You do everything within your power, yet the outcome remains outside your control. This is where most people break, not because they failed, but because they attach their entire identity to a result they could not guarantee. The Stoics discovered a profound truth. You gain unshakable focus not by controlling outcomes, but by detaching from them. Have you ever felt paralyzed by the fear of failing? Have you hesitated to begin something important because you worried it wouldn't work? Have you felt crushed when results didn't match your expectations? This pain comes from attachment, the belief that your worth depends on what happens outside you. But outcomes belong to the external world. Your effort, intention, and discipline belong to you. When you attach your peace to the result, you hand your emotional stability to forces you cannot control. The Stoics refused to do this. They believed that your duty is to act with excellence, not to guarantee success. Marcus Aurelius repeated to himself that you can control your choices but not the consequences. Epictetus taught his students to do your part with unwavering commitment and release the rest. Seneca reminded us that the person who is controlled by hope is controlled by fear as well, because both depend on external events. Modern psychology calls this outcome independence, a mental state where your focus is anchored in the process rather than the result. Neuroscience shows that people who detach from outcomes maintain higher levels of cognitive function under stress. Their prefrontal cortex stays active, allowing clearer thinking, better problem solving, and more consistent performance. Attachment creates tension. Tension disrupts clarity. Clarity is necessary for growth. Ask yourself, how often have you avoided taking action because you feared the outcome? How often have you sabotaged your progress because results didn't come fast enough? How often have you lost motivation because the world didn't reward your efforts immediately? This is the trap of attachment. When your motivation depends on results, you become fragile. When your motivation depends on effort, you become unstoppable. Detachment is not indifference, it is freedom. It is the ability to act with full commitment while remaining emotionally steady regardless of the result. It allows you to give everything without losing yourself. It allows you to stay disciplined even when progress is slow. It allows you to navigate uncertainty without collapsing into anxiety. Imagine creating with passion without needing validation. Imagine pursuing goals without being consumed by the timeline. Imagine working with consistency without being tormented by comparison. Detachment makes all of this possible. It aligns your mind with what you can influence and releases you from what you cannot. The Stoics viewed detachment as a form of inner leadership. When you detach from outcomes, you reclaim authority over your emotional life. You stop letting external circumstances dictate your inner state. You stop negotiating with uncertainty. You stop tying your worth to success or failure. You begin to define yourself by your integrity, not your achievements. When you act from this place, pressure diminishes and clarity increases. Detachment also strengthens focus. When you are not obsessed with outcomes, you can fully immerse yourself in the process. You can think clearly, work patiently, and adapt intelligently. Your mind becomes quiet enough to notice details you once overlooked. Your energy becomes steady enough to stay consistent. Your spirit becomes grounded enough to persist. Ask yourself again, what would you pursue if you knew that the outcome would not define you? What dreams would you revive if you could let go of the fear of failure? What habits would you commit to if you stopped expecting instant results? Detachment opens these doors. It replaces fear with curiosity. It replaces pressure with presence. It replaces desperation with discipline. The Stoic secret is this: success is not guaranteed, but growth is, if your effort remains steady. When you detach from outcomes, you stop trying to force life to obey your expectations. Instead, you focus on what you can build, what you can control, and who you can become through the process. Unshakable focus is not created by eliminating uncertainty. It is created by eliminating the belief that uncertainty must control you. When you detach from outcomes, your mind becomes free, and a free mind becomes unstoppable, becoming the architect of your own mind. There comes a moment in your journey when you realize that the greatest battle you will ever fight is not against circumstance, not against other people, not against chance, but against the untrained parts of your own mind. And there also comes a profound moment, quiet, steady, life-changing, when you recognize that this battle is winnable, not through force, not through perfection, but through awareness, guidance, and daily practice. Everything you have learned in this journey points to one truth. You are not a passive observer of your mental life. You are its architect. Every thought you question reshapes your internal structure. Every emotion you meet with awareness rewires your nervous system. Every microaction builds a new habit. Every reflection refines your character. Every act of acceptance calms your inner storms. Every visualization prepares you for moments you once feared. Every step away from attachment strengthens your resilience. Growth is not something that occasionally happens to you. Growth is something you construct piece by piece, breath by breath, choice by choice. Have you noticed how different your mind feels when you stop fighting yourself? When you stop attacking your mistakes? When you stop demanding certainty? When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable? The Stoics understood that peace begins the moment you stop waging war against reality and begin collaborating with it. And modern psychology confirms that clarity emerges when resistance dissolves, when self-compassion replaces self-judgment, when intentional action replaces impulsive reaction. Imagine yourself now as someone who has learned to return to center no matter how far life pulls you. Someone who sees fear not as a verdict, but as a signal. Someone who interprets difficulty not as punishment, but as training. Someone who no longer collapses under discomfort, but grows through it. Someone who understands that the inner critic is not an authority, but an old habit being replaced by a wiser voice. Someone who no longer needs perfect circumstances to feel grounded, because grounding comes from within. This is the person you are becoming. And the Stoics would remind you of something vital. Becoming is a daily act. You will not reach a point where the mind stops producing fear, frustration, or doubt, but you will reach a point where those emotions no longer control you. You will recognize them as passing visitors. You will greet them with clarity, learn from them, and guide them instead of being guided by them. Your mind becomes a place of stability, not chaos. A place of inquiry, not panic. A place of discipline and compassion living side by side. Ask yourself now, if your mind is truly yours to shape, what kind of mind do you want to build? A mind anchored in awareness. A mind strengthened by effort. A mind softened by compassion. A mind widened by perspective. A mind guided by virtue and aligned with truth. This is not philosophy in abstract. This is philosophy as architecture, psychology as practice, neuroscience as reinforcement. You are weaving these together every day you choose to live with intention. Understand this deeply. You are not at the mercy of your past. You are not defined by your old patterns. You are not imprisoned by your identity. You are not condemned to repeat the same reactions. You are capable of becoming someone wiser, steadier, calmer, and stronger than you ever imagined. The mind is malleable. The self is renewable. The inner world is within your command. When you embody the Stoic principles you have learned, clarity of perception, emotional alchemy, voluntary discomfort, self-compassion, detachment from outcomes, something extraordinary happens. Your life does not necessarily become easier, but you become stronger. Challenges no longer crush you because you no longer collapse into them. Fear no longer silences you because you no longer interpret it as a threat. Uncertainty no longer paralyzes you because you trust your ability to respond to whatever comes. This is what it means to be the architect of your own mind. You build the inner structure that supports every decision, every challenge, every moment of growth. You design the mental environment in which your life unfolds, and through that design you shape not only your experience of the world, but your capacity to move through it with purpose. So now, take a breath, feel the weight of everything you have learned settle into a single truth. The life you want begins with the mind you build. If you build it with discipline and compassion, with awareness and courage, with clarity and acceptance, nothing outside you will ever have the power to break what you have constructed within.